Good evening, everyone. My name is Julian Santos, and today we'll be presenting our research findings. Like I said, my name is Julian Sanchez. I'm a junior studying political science.
I'm Hannah. I'm a freshman, and I'm an econ and math major.
Hi, I'm Nyla, and I'm studying political science and philosophy, politics, and law, and I'm a junior.
Hi, I'm Tyrese. I'm a freshman studying philosophy, politics, and law.
Hi, I'm Gabrielle, and I'm a junior studying philosophy, politics, and economics.
So our research today is based on two questions. What factors influence whether young candidates choose to run for Congress, and what barriers or advantages affect their chances of being elected? What changes should be implemented to help more young people get elected to Congress is the second question. To understand the who, we have to define the generations that our research is about. Our research is focusing on Generation Z, and it says Generation Y there, but it ultimately means millennials. And so this is the outline of our presentation. It's also the order of how our presentation is laid out. So when I looked at the research questions, three main aspects popped out to me. It's why do young people run, the role of prior experience that plays, and then ultimately, where do they start if they want to run? The answer lies in dissatisfaction. So Pew Research did a poll in 2023 asking US adults aged 18 through 29 and 30 through 49 about how they felt the candidates who were running for office in the past years, how they felt. And 75% of them said the candidates were bad. This points out the negative sentiment that creates a vacuum. Young people aren't running because they love the system. They're running because they're trying to fix it. And I call this the anti-establishment or the disruption motivation. Young people say that the country is heading in the wrong direction. However, they also believe that they have the power to change it. This paradox that the system is broken, but they also have the chance to fix it, is the primary engine that's driving Gen Z to run. They enter the field as reformers and not as politicians. And specifically, they're running on survival. So recently, whether it's Zoran Mamdani, Donovan McKinney, or Matt Ben Epps.
It's okay.
They are just running on abstract ideology. They're running on the cost of running, or the cost of living, and inflation and affordability. 53% of young voters cited that cost of living and inflation as their number one issue. These candidates are reflecting that reality, running on rent caps, living wages, and fighting inflation. They're also running because the American dream has become mathematically impossible for their generation. Pillar 2, the role of experience. For decades, political science has told us that quality candidates were those who had previously held office before. From 1980s to about mid-2010s, 75% of new elected members to the House had prior elected experience. Since about mid-2010s to now, it's dropped to 50%. This decrease, we're seeing a historic decrease where experience is no longer the primary indicator of candidate quality. This trend is most visible in open seat primaries. As you can see, experienced candidates' success rate in open seat primaries in the last decade has dropped 30%. Open seat elections are usually elections that an incumbent is not running for re-election or has retired. And like I said, no prior experienced individuals elected to Congress have been elected to Congress by an open seat election in 70% of the races that they've run. They are the best opportunity for new blood. And in the early 2000s, amateurs were rare. Today, they're winning at almost double the rate. This graph confirms that story. If you look at the curve on the right-hand side, you can see the success rate of experienced candidates in open seat primaries. It has plummeted by about 30% in the last decade. The barrier to entry used to be waiting your turn. That barrier has since diminished. This data shows that voters, especially in primaries, are actually punishing careerism and electing new faces. So pillar 3, where do they start? So the traditional pipeline is being replaced by a new infrastructure. As you can see, the pipeline, 40% of Congress was elected had previous experience in state legislators and then ran and got into Congress. 23% of 18 to 25-year-olds who ran for state or federal office jumped in 2018. It jumped to 23%. So organizations like Run for Something are targeting the 60% of local races that go unopposed. They're turning low barrier seats into a bench for the future. We can see those in 2 instances where after Mamdani's primary win, 10,000 people signed up for in Run for Something system, and then even more after post-2024 election at 67,000. So if we want to see these pillars in action, the perfect person to represent that is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So a little bit about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is she's the congresswoman from New York, 14th district. Her age at election was 28. Her previous roles were as a bartender and organizer, so no previous experience in elected office. And then in 2018, how she got into Congress is she defeated a 10-term incumbent, Joe Crowley. And so pillar 1, she was outspent 18-1. Policy is the new personality. AOC's campaign really focused on the crisis at hand, which was for her and for many of people in her district was the financial survival, the foreclosure and risk in student debt. The policy that she brought forward in her campaign was the Green New Deal and Medicare for all. Gen Z and millennials didn't just vote for her representation; they voted for her policy and her shift into a better future for those. As you can see here, pillar 2, the amateur advantage. On the left, we can see Joe Crowley, who she defeated. He was the veteran in the race. He raised $3.4 million and served 10 terms before AOC challenged him. And then as you can see, AOC raised $200K, and she had served 0 terms in any elected office before. She, like I said, she was outraised 18-1, but she won. And she proved that you can beat big money without even more money, but with a difference in policy. And then pillar 3, the accelerated federal jump. So in 2016, she was an organizer. In 2017, she was a bartender. 2018, Congress. She bypassed the city council and state assembly entirely. By leveraging movement politics, she compressed a 20-year career ladder into 2 years. In conclusion, the barriers are falling, experience matters less, policy matters more, and the pipeline is moving faster than ever before. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'll just introduce myself again. I'm Hannah. I'm a freshman. I'm an econ and math major. And I'll be talking about the politics of running as a young woman, specifically the experiences of millennial and Gen Z women and how they differ from their male peers, as well as older women. So sometimes deciding to run can be a barrier in of itself. So what we have seen is that young women obviously have to confront gender stereotypes as well as generational ones. And Studies about that have also shown that women simply tend to wait longer to run for office too. And that taps into the idea of a youth ambition gap, which is kind of a universal concept that simply describes that young women are not expected to achieve those things. They're not going to be encouraged to do so, and as a result are less likely to run. And if they do decide to run, because they lack the resources that their male peers do have, they're less likely to be successful in those runs for political office. And so a great way of understanding this is by looking at their experiences and the experiences of older women. And so obviously the starting point differs for those two groups. Young women are not going to have as much institutional credibility. They're not going to have as much experience. And for baby boomers and Gen X, even if they don't have a career or haven't been in politics before, oftentimes they can leverage other but related experience as a talking point in their campaign or later on once they're actually elected in policymaking. So an example of that is a baby boomer, for example, having a career in healthcare and later on leveraging that as a talking point about healthcare insurance or potentially reproductive rights. And that taps into institutional support, which essentially means that baby boomers and Gen X women are more likely to win their party primaries, and they're more likely to receive endorsements as a result. Whereas for millennial and Gen Z women, that is simply just not the case. They're not as experienced and they don't have that credibility. And as a result, they're not likely to win those primaries as much. A great example of this is AOC, and we talked about her before, but in this context specifically, once she defeated Crowley in the Democratic primary, she began to receive endorsements and more donor support. And so that is where that institutional support really almost made her campaign and made her a lot more successful. And lastly, that taps into the perception of experience too. Older women are going to be seen as more experienced because they are going to have more experience, but millennial and Gen Z women are going to have to tackle those gendered and generational stereotypes at once, which really kind of increases the amount of times that they're framed as inexperienced and naive in the media. There's also a difference in how young women are treated in the Democratic and the Republican Party. And on both ends, women are going to be expected to be more radical than their male peers. For example, among the Democrats, women are going to be seen as expected to be more progressive on kind of traditionally female issues, including, for example, abortion. And with Republican candidates, they're going to be expected to be more right-wing, especially in those areas. And so a great example of this, and I'll get into that candidate later too, but is Marjorie Taylor Greene. She specifically distances herself from any sort of feminist framing and really avoids using her gender or her identity as a woman as a talking point in, frankly, any of her speeches and public campaigns. Whereas on the Democratic end, figures like AOC are going to be expected to be almost more progressive on abortion than her male peers again. And so now I'm going to get into my case studies. So like I said, AOC really kind of made her campaign once she defeated Crowley, which was a really big defeat, what the New York Times described as one of the most significant Democratic upsets. And once she did so, she was able to leverage her lack of experience as almost experience. So what she did, and Julian touched on this before, but she utilized her working class identity and almost her identity as a young person as experience and utilized that as a talking point. And again, once she was granted the Democratic endorsements, she received other endorsements from other Democratic Party figures as well, including Bernie Sanders, which really helped her in being the youngest woman elected for Congress. Now, on the complete other side of the spectrum, Marjorie Taylor Greene, like I said, tends to defend and tends to kind of avoid using gender as a talking point in general. And she does use kind of right-wing extremism to confront that too. She uses a lot of military language. She did that after the January 6th attack on the Capitol too. Specifically, she utilized a lot of military language to kind of avoid being associated with traditionally feminine figures. And what that results in is her having almost a gender neutral presence, which essentially means that she doesn't put her gender on the table and therefore it is not discussed. Now, she has announced her resignation relatively recently, but I still think it's a great example to look at her and how she has been a figure in the Republican Party. Now I'm just going to get into some policy solutions that can potentially remedy this. One is small dollar matching, which is a system currently being employed in New York City. And what essentially means is that small donations, I believe they're capped at around $1,000, are all going to be matched by the New York City state times 6, which really helps both young candidates but also women who are new to the field and don't have as much experience and don't have as much donor support. Pre-candidacy toolkits are a great way to encourage and educate younger people about the possibility of running. And they are mostly utilized by the Democratic Party, so they would probably help younger candidates running to be a part of the Democratic Party a little bit more. And lastly, party parity goals, which again would primarily help women, but I do think it would also be a great idea to have those be set by age. They're currently being employed by a lot of parties in Europe. Switzerland and Norway have it as like a general standard, whereas Canada, the National Democratic Party, has it established internally within their system. And that is it for me, but now I'm going to pass on to Nick.
Hi, I'm Nyla, and I'll be talking about candidacy, representation, and electoral reform, and specifically how representation, pre-registration, as well as ranked choice voting expands youth pathways for younger candidates. And so here we have the scope of youth underrepresentation. And so here we have the total US population, and I have a statistic here that says young Americans make up over 40% of the US population, but hold under 10% of congressional seats. And so this is from the US Census Bureau, and the age specifically is millennials and Gen Zs, and this congressional data. And so here we have the total US population, in which youth make up over 40%. And then here we have in the darker blue that the 10% of youth candidates hold congressional seats. And so we have structural barriers that youth candidates often face. Why is there the 10% congressional seats for youth candidates? Well, typically House campaign costs around $2 million. And so millennial and Gen Z candidates often do not have wealthy donors, donor networks, for example, Democracy PAC, private equity donor networks to fund for them, or having decades of career savings, and as well as having networks such as to Wall Street and to general PACs. This poses a limitation. And so the structural barriers that young candidates face, we have 3 here. One of them I discussed before, financial barriers. The youth often undergo financial barriers, such as political campaigning, as well as the strategy that they impose as well when running for congressional seats. This costs a lot of extra money, and in that case, the youth often have a disadvantage. And so second, we have political mentorship and gatekeeping. With political mentorship, often people within more experienced positions provide mentorship as well as gatekeeping, as well as this connection between youth representation. It poses a unrepresentation of the youth candidates. And then we also have work, school, and life constraints. The youth also undergo school, processes of caregiving, as well as general life constraints that overall restrict and limit the amount of time they can give to congressional running. And so here we have a voter attitudes towards young candidates, and we have specifically too young to run voter evaluations of the age of candidates. And this is specifically where this information is from. So we have here that voters are open to young candidates when they show strong policy proposals, long-term vision, authentic connection to voters, as well as age being less important than values, fresh perspective, and relatability. And so this really shows that the interest of the youth population is more oriented towards these values, these characteristics. As Julian mentioned as well, policy is a big factor in terms of voter attitudes towards youth candidates. And here we have pre-registration laws specifically. And we also have 50% of the US teens where they're able to pre-register at the age of 16. And so we have certain states, as well as the 20% more of teens where they're allowed to kind of register at least 1 year to register before the first election. And so we see those are highlighted. The reason why I put this up here is because of Circle. They have this quote, statistic that says pre-registration laws are associated with increased youth turnout and registration. And so these laws are typically associated with a higher voter turnout, and I can explain why in the next slide. And so here we have ranked choice voting jurisdictions, specifically how ranked choice voting helps younger voters. And so younger voters report having more campaign contact, higher political interest, better understanding of the voting process, feeling more respected by candidates, increased civility, reduces political cynicism. And here we have a quote from Growing National Momentum, described as the fastest growing nonpartisan electoral reform. And basically ranked choice voting, which is not specifically used for congressional seats for congressional voting, but it is used in Maine and Alaska. And I have a case study to help further explain that. So here we have Congressman Jared Golden, and his age is 43. He was a millennial, and as well as his party being Democratic. Jared was 36 when he won Maine's 2nd district in 2018. And this was the first house to ever run by ranked choice voting, actually, in Maine. So we have here that for him, RCV, or ranked choice voting, essentially allowed him to win because of the second choice ballots and how the from third-party voters helped him to overcome the incumbent. And so we can see here how ranked choice voting can promote and provide a pathway towards younger candidates and help them to get into congressional seats.
Okay, so I'm going to start off by talking about moving politics, specifically PACs, for PACs, for organizations, and specifically I use 2 case studies that kind of exemplify the complexity of money and intricacies of money in politics. So just starting off the overview, PACs or political action committees, they're allowed to donate up to $5,000 per campaign, while super PACs are able to receive unlimited donations and push unlimited money into advertising. And then lobbying is a subsection of political action committees, and it's kind of when PACs use their power and they leverage it with legislators. So corporations are allowed to influence legislation through PAC financial contributions. Lobbyists are employed by PACs and use to contact congressional people and get their own private interests pushed through or like advocated for in law. And it's protected by First Amendment right to petition the government. And then finally, grassroots fundraising that consists of small amounts from a lot of people and it rivals for money. So then we're going to start with the case study number 1, Big Pharma, Medicare Part D. That's too far. Starting with facts, the voter wanted the power to negotiate drug prices. The pharmaceutical lobby fought against this and they advocated on behalf of private companies. Simultaneously, 2000 and 2002 accounted for 2 of 5 election cycles with the highest spending, with $367 million spent between those 2 races on party candidates and committees. In the end, Congress did pass Medicare Part B, which did not negotiatory power. And just simply for some context, at the same time, medical bills accounted for 40% of bankruptcies in 2000, and only 64% of Americans were insured in 2000. So this leads to corporate money. What does it do? Essentially, it cements the status quo. This is a quote from one of my favorite studies in this process. The accumulated power of wealth, corporate organizational strength, and other factors keeping some actors out of Washington and giving others multiple and louder voices in the process is already in the status quo. They're quote unquote baked into the cake. That's essentially saying it enshrines the processes that have given corporations the wealth they have, and lobbying is simply to eliminate the elimination of any loopholes that have helped them amass this money. But then what do you do when corporate money doesn't equal the change, but money is critical to being elected? This is a graph that shows the probability of a non-incumbent being elected based on the amount of money in their campaign. So starting with the $0, it's a 15% chance, and once you go up to $800, $800,000, I apologize, it rises to 44%. So money is critical, but there aren't always PACs supporting you, and if you want to remain true to your values, and if you don't want to have to succumb to PAC organizations or bigger lobbies, you are sort of forced to make your own money. This, I feel like, was properly exemplified by Obama and the 2008 election cycle. Just some context. Obama was the first presidential grassroots campaign that insisted on protection of PAC money. 2 out of his 4 main tenets were universal health care and decreasing the influence of lobbyists in Washington. So essentially 2 of the last 2 is directly associated with the money in politics and about kind of trying to eliminate corruption by politics. But to go into grassroots fundraising, it represents solidarity with the voters. It was revolutionized by Obama's campaign in 2008. It's most effective with unifiable community-oriented messaging, and 67% of donations were below $200, and that accounted for 362 out of the $541 million. And there's just a certain demographic, a certain statistic that really stood out to me. When Joe Manchin's running mate announced, her name is so Sarah Palin, when she announced that she was running, the next 24 hours, he received 130,000 donations, amassing $10 million. So Obama's campaign coming about as soon as the internet was elected, he revolutionized online donating. And it was the first time that people were able to specifically support something that engaged about politics. Before this time, it was kind of separated, and you didn't have the ability to directly contribute at that exact moment to causes that mattered to you. And what he did after he got elected, there was the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. It was an actualization of his campaign goals, universal health care. It led to 50 million Americans insured and tried to believe that healthcare is a human right. This is just more for understanding like what you can do when you are not bound to public resources, and it connects to case study number 1, where a lot of the voters weren't listened to. It was more of the corporate money that spoke louder, and Obama came in shortly after that and did what he could to enshrine the healthcare being a human right. And then grassroots campaigns, he paved the way for a lot of formidable people after his campaign. Sorry. The Affordable Care Act in 2010, AOC, which we talked about a lot, Kamala Harris, and finally Zohran Mamdani in the 2024 New York City mayoral campaign. And just key takeaways, money is essential for candidates to enter politics. To preserve political integrity, young candidates without PAC ties are needed to take on the establishment, and universal issues are key to soliciting donations and creating tangible change. And finally, I'm going to pass it off to Gabrielle.
Hello, today I'm going to be talking about how the established parties treat young candidates. So the first thing I want to talk about is the structure of the Democratic Party. So the Democratic Party has the DCCC and the DSCC, and basically what these are the House and Senate campaign arms. So they work on things like strategic advising and fundraising support. The House has 2, so it has Frontline and Red to Blue. Frontline is an incumbent protection program, so they basically identify vulnerable incumbents and they try and get funding and support to them, where Red to Blue is their more offensive slate. So this is for, as the name suggests, flipping the color of certain districts. So the Senate also has no public scorecard, but they still, of course, do support and fundraise for their candidates. So this is the age breakdown of the Frontline and Red to Blue programs for the House. So you can see that Frontline is going to be a less slice of the pie is going to be candidates under 40, about 7.5%, because it's going to be very biased towards it's all incumbents. So incumbents tend to be older, so the age range is going to skew a little older for the Frontline program. But when you look at Red to Blue, which is the newer, the flipping party program, it over doubles. So it's about 18.2% of the Frontline candidates or the Red to Blue candidates are under the age of 40. The Republican Party is pretty much structured the same way. So they have their House and Senate programs. The Senate also doesn't have a public scorecard, but the House has the Young Guns, which is their offensive slate as well. So they're a party for open seat primaries and primarily flipping districts as well. And they don't have a frontline program, but they do, of course, support vulnerable incumbents. They want to fund those and get them back in the House, but they just don't list it out and publicly endorse them the same way that the Democratic Party does. So this is going to be the age breakdown for the Young Guns program. Their candidates under 40 come in at about 26.9%. So here's the comparison. We're going to exclude frontline from the comparison just because Red to Blue and Young Guns are more analogous programs. They're designed to flip. You can see that candidates under 40 for Red to Blue, again, is about 18%. It's about 27% for the Young Guns. And here's basically just a further age breakdown of that. You can see so it is statistically relevant. It's about a 10% difference, 10% less candidates under the age of 40 are supported under the DCC's program for young challengers. And the reason why for that is because part of it is there is statistics that show that Republicans do leave office and face challenges within their own party at a higher rate than Democrats do, which can leave openings for newcomers. However, in this instance, we're talking about pre-existing like party establishment programs designed to flip states. So incumbent turnover data isn't as relevant here like this. And what we're going to look at is the context of party culture and party ideology when it comes to ages. So first, this is a random sample of 4 of the latest batch of Red to Blue candidates. So you can see that a common theme that emerges here is that people are what you would basically refer to as middle-aged, professionally established moderates. So you have a NASA chief of staff, the CEO of Virgin Galactic, your Supreme Court clerk, you have congressional staffer who's worked a lot on campaigns as well. And then also for one of our youngest candidates here in these programs is Michelle Vallejo, who's 34, but she has been very successful. So her district is in Texas that she ran for, and she established, I think, 3 or 4 political nonprofits that work towards increasing equity in Texas. So she's also what you would call like a very successful, very proven already young person. And I think we can see this ideology will probably continue as we see the evolution of the Democratic Party into the 2026 midterms. So going to 2025, the Democratic Party has had the weakest structural position it's had in decades. They don't have any of the 3 branches of government. Polling shows that the party brand is in a slump. You can see here they're about 28 points underwater for Democrats in Congress in comparison to the 20 points underwater of the Republicans. And as well, studies also show, which is very intuitive, that when political uncertainty is high and when a political party has already lost a lot of support or they've lost their political power, historically parties tend to become more risk averse. They shift towards more moderate and predictable candidates that they think will have a higher likelihood of succeeding, which again is a very intuitive result done by a study from Cambridge University. And you can also see this as well in recent political candidates. So neither of these would be eligible for DCCC funding, but they are probably the 2 most famous millennial candidates that have come out in the last year. So Mamdani obviously was very successful in his election for New York City mayor, and Graham Plattner is running for Senate as well for the 2026 midterms. And you can see that they are notable absences in party endorsements, despite them having very strong national attention, New York Times articles, Wall Street Journal articles, and very strong polling as well within their districts. It is also because, as you can see, there was a very strong presence in the Democratic Party that Mamdani ran against, and with Plattner, the Democratic Party, the DSCC, chose to fund instead Janet Mills, who was the governor of Maine previously. She's someone who has already had like very established that she can succeed in Maine as well. She's 77 and she would be about the oldest freshman senator in American history. But as well, you can also see that both of these candidates have been associated with democratic socialism and talked about that. And just recently, 3 weeks ago, the House sort of passed a statement, or they released a statement that had a lot of Democrats behind it too, denouncing the horrors of socialism. So you can see that very, very recent Democratic strategy sort of skews the same way. They're also skewing towards more moderate and more safe candidates, even if they're more famous and better polling ones in the same areas. Okay, so the NRCC has a very different strategy. Basically, the GOP holds pretty much full federal power at the moment, and parties in strong positions also intuitively have more room to be flexible with the candidates that they have. So they have a bigger flexibility to support a wide range of candidates, But I think a more interesting thing is that Republican ideology has shifted a lot in the last 10 to 15 years. Obviously, Donald Trump and Mitt Romney are two very, very different candidates. And you can see this graph's a little cluttered, but the important part is this is the populism trend within the Republican Party. So you can see in 2010 it goes up with the Tea Party movement, and then it's sort of flat and increases a little bit for the last 10, 15 years. And then at the 2016 election, it's like skyrockets straight up. So Donald Trump really was a very big driver of populism in the Republican Party. And you also see this in more internal diversity politically represented. So the classic like country club Republicans are becoming a smaller slice of the pie, people that Mitt Romney would support, more corporate interests, small government, personal liberty Republicans. And so the party has taken a more sharp populist turn. It's skewing more working class and away from the traditional GOP orthodoxy. And you can also see that with the latest batch of Young Guns candidates. So these look very different from the red to blue candidates. You have people like Caroline Dobson, who's a Harvard-educated lawyer, but she's also a cattle farmer. Scott Baugh was in the California State Assembly, which is a traditional political career, but he was recalled in his district. And he also is a convicted felon for campaign finance fraud. Maya Flores has been a chair of Hispanic outreach for the Republican Party in Texas, but she also has very strong online QAnon associations. So she's been involved in conspiracy theories, things like COVID being related to China and like the Wuhan virus and stuff like that. And then Joe Kent is another candidate who was an Army veteran, but he also has ties to January 6th criminals. He's ties to the Proud Boys, and he's one of the Peter Thiel-backed like tech right candidates as well. So you can see that there's more diversity here. And someone like Graham Plattner, who also has populist ties and who also has online controversy in his past, seems like he would be someone that the Republicans would support if he was on their side, but the Democrats passed over him, even despite the polling. So in general, the results that we can take away from this, obviously it's not a binary, and this doesn't represent necessarily what the voters want. It represents more what the establishment parties are looking for when they're recruiting in their more traditional facets. So it is more stable, more palatable, more moderate, and more highly credentialed candidates. People who have already achieved success in their careers, as we saw. And those people just tend to be people who are a little older because they've had more time for career success. Whereas for Republican candidates, there's a wider ideological range. They're more receptive to outsiders, young candidates, people with no experience, who don't come from traditional or highly successful backgrounds, but who do represent a niche and support a party message. So those are really the candidates that the establishment parties support. There's a bit of a difference in the patterns that you can see there. So that concludes the research part of our presentation. We now want to very briefly just move on to talk about the spreadsheet. So this is what we all did, our states with a spreadsheet. And we also want to talk about some patterns that we noticed, just some trends in the spreadsheet work that we did. So even though age is the most important, unfortunately, age has been the most difficult qualifier for us to find. One of the resources that we've been using, obviously, if they're incumbents, they'll be on Wikipedia. So you can get like a full birth date then, full background. And sometimes they'll have it on their like personal profiles, like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X. But the most important or the most helpful one for us has been LinkedIn, I think. Like you can see oftentimes they put the age they graduated high school and you could assume they were 18, or when they graduated college, assume 22, and you can sort of get a rough estimate of what age they are. One of the other problems we ran into was blind candidates. So there's some candidates who registered and they're on Ballotpedia to run for office, but they don't have a photo attached or a campaign website or any socials. They're sort of like a blank. So we can't really cross-reference any information. It's difficult in that capacity. And then the other thing is just that there was, just because it's a little early, there was somewhat of a time barrier because we started a little early, more candidates enter the race, candidates drop out. So we don't necessarily get a full picture. Like sometimes we can go back and we can check and try to delete the candidates that dropped out, but it's just with timing, sometimes there's probably going to be some candidates on the spreadsheet that have dropped out, or we're probably going to be missing a few just due to the nature of like the quantity of candidates. But yeah, that concludes our presentation, and we'd like to thank you guys so much for allowing us to do this internship with you, and we very much enjoyed it. Process.
I know Paige is on Zoom, but maybe we want to, well, Paige, if you're going to be off camera, I just want to give you the floor I don't know why I'm looking over there, like she's over there. Oh, there she is. I just want to give you the floor to ask some questions or to give some feedback to our students, if you would like.
Sorry.
Okay, fantastic. I'll say that I learned something.
I can hear you now.
Okay, are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So as someone who is thinking about these things all day, every day, I learned quite a few things. So thank you. Especially about women candidates being more extreme on either side of each party. So yeah, what a very cool insight. Yeah, as far as feedback, I mean, I think you all did a spectacular job, and I think you really were able to verbalize all the different trends that you identified. I have two questions, which is I'm curious, maybe kind of like what was the most interesting or surprising thing that you learned? And then I'm curious if any of you now have any interest in running for office as young people.
One of you could take that.
Yeah, not everyone has to answer, but anyone who feels moved.
Something that I learned that was really interesting, an incumbent, the more money they spend, the more likely it is that they'll lose. Because the more money that you're spending means that you have a stronger competitor who's taking more attention away from you. So the more money you spend, it's kind of like the more likely you're not going to win the race. I thought that was kind of catch-22 that interested me. I know I'm looking at the speaker.
It's okay. Anybody else learn something?
For myself, I really enjoyed, I thought it was quite interesting. I looked into some of Marjorie Taylor Greene's kind of social media posts, which I wouldn't usually do on like a daily basis. So I think it was interesting to see kind of how she taps into a lot of that right-wing extremism to kind of distance herself away from her being a woman, but also kind of those gendered stereotypes. So I thought that was really interesting. And I think from that point onwards, I've been kind of trying to diversify the media that I read because I realized it was very kind of one-sided.
Anybody want to run for office? Anybody want to work on a campaign? Yeah, okay. So we have behind the scenes people in this group, Paige.
Very cool. Well, I've been a behind the scenes person on campaigns, and I have to tell you, it's a great experience. So
Amazing. Any other thoughts or questions for us, Paige?
just gratitude. I know how difficult this research is, and I think you saw why we're the only organization that does this. So, truly so thankful. And we do print physical copies of the report and we release it. So we'll make sure to get your info, send you guys some copies. But to make sure that you get, once it goes out, which will honestly be for several months from now, but just to see the fruits of your labor come together.
Amazing. Appreciate that. I will be emailing you next week, like all of the final wrap up in a bow nicely pieces from this presentation and project for the students. So you'll be hearing from me.